Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is Thursday, July 9th, and I'm watching various events take place. And, I have to say things look pretty iffy at this point. The situation in Iran is quite serious. The memorandum of understanding is kaput. Um, the United States and Iran have been trading, military attacks on each other, and of course, it has to be considered the fact that the United States had attacked Iran without any kind of any legitimate reason, and so that situation is not good, and it looks like it could be getting a lot worse. But I want to talk about from the point of view of the Ukraine conflict primarily, and also just the nature of the administration and what's going on with the U.S. administration and why I think it's so dangerous. So I'm calling this prognosis a slippery slope. And so I'm just going to go through a number of different data points of what has been going on so that people can get an idea of what is actually happening. So the first point is that President Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, now admits that the Ukraine situation is a war. It was called a special military operation because Russia was not like carpet bombing Kiev and things like that, which the United States has done when it goes to war. When it usually in the case of Iraq or Afghanistan and even in Iran, they were indiscriminately bombing, killing children. This is not a strategic decision. It's just wanton terrorism. But these Peskov is saying that this is a war, and he says, I'm quoting here. He says, "Behind Kiev stands Berlin, Paris, The Hague, Oslo, and unfortunately Washington, because they are helped to aim their satellites. That is, Ukraine is aimed to help their satellites. They are helped to direct foreign weapons at our targets through their entire infrastructure." And it has to really be pointed out again and again and again that I just saw an item by some guy talking about how when Russia invaded Ukraine, these people, the Western media simply will not own up to the fact that Ukraine was ostensibly a neutral country. The United States used the CIA to empower the remnants of collaborators of the Nazis in World War II and their descendants to create a coup which overthrew the democratically elected government, which started attacking ethnic Russians throughout Ukraine, and that ultimately, after 8 years of broken promises to solve this problem and an incipient attack planning on an ethnic cleansing situation, that Russia finally, prevented that. But of course, we don't hear any of that, and so it's all Russia's fault. Um, but that's according to them. But in fact, they are the perpetrators of this whole tragedy in Ukraine, which is destroying the country completely. Now, the next issue is that Margarita Simenon, who's the editor-in-chief of RT, the RT is the Russian equivalent of the BBC, points out that Russia has not attacked a single European city. Yet European and American weapons are being used to attack Russia, along with targeting and logistical support by the West. The West is at war with Russia. They're just pretending that they have nothing to do with it because the attacks are coming directly from Ukraine. However, the training, the logistics, the weapons, all of that stuff, it's all Western. All from from the British and the Europeans and the United States. And then we have item number 3. Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, admits that while the U.S. pretends to be a mediator in the Ukraine conflict, it's actually on the side of Ukraine. So even though the United States says, oh, we're just trying to solve this problem between Ukraine and the United States, he knows perfectly well that this is a war of the United States against Russia using Ukraine. And item number 4, Sergei Lavrov, who's the foreign minister of Russia, had said that he felt that negotiations with Rubio had showed sincerity. Now he admits that the U.S. used the Anchorage summit as a subterfuge, and he says that the U.S. is agreement incapable. This is a term that's been used for a long time. The Russians have tried again and again and again and again and again, starting from the NATO expansion, which they had promised not to do following the collapse of the Soviet Union, to the Minsk agreements, to the Istanbul agreements, to Anchorage, and so the Russians are slowly coming to grips with the fact that there is no diplomatic solution to this problem. President Trump, for his part, is acting far from presidential, much less diplomatic. He's used extremely hostile language towards Iran and overlooking the U.S.-Israel initiating the war of aggression against Iran and never showing the slightest intention of honoring the memorandum of understanding regarding the Iran war. So people talk about Trump derangement syndrome, and I think people need to consider the possibility that it's not people who are deranged about their ideas of Trump. It's that Trump himself is deranged when he uses, really the most vile language to describe Iran, which was minding its own business and was attacked by the United States. And when Iran responds, "Oh, it's Iran's the problem," this is derangement on his part. Now, the 25th Amendment. Oh, I might mention he said that he referred to the Islamic Republic of Japan, which shows that there's some kind of a few loose screws in his consciousness. But there you go. So the 25th Amendment is something, it's an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was created to relieve the president in the event of a failure to carry out the duties of president. And based on the apparent psychological condition of the president, this option must be explored. The nuclear button should not be anywhere near Donald Trump. However, I do not hear anything about Congress or any of the government officials saying, maybe we need to consider the possibility that Trump really is incapable of acting as president, or he's acting in a way that is just so outrageous that it's putting the entire world in danger. Now, in terms of Crimea, I have a very dear friend of mine who lives in Crimea. I just checked the latest news there, and it says that the Crimean bridge is open now. So that's a positive situation. However, the fact of the matter is that Ukraine has been bombing Crimea. It has been attacking it. It has been trying to cut off its food supplies and fuel supplies and so on and so forth. There have been attacks on ships trying to send fuel to Crimea from the mainland. So you have that sort of situation, which is, it's putting the whole situation in Crimea at risk. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in a minute. Basically, what this shows, this attack on Crimea, is that the West is feeling more and more desperate, and they're just looking for some way to offset the fact that Russia has been experiencing many battlefield successes in the Donbass area and in the whole area of Novorossiya. And of course, President Putin has recently said that it's not just Donbass, but Novorossiya, which needs to be liberated from these, crazies who are running the Ukraine government. Of course, that entails the city of Odessa, which was founded by Catherine the Great. It is a Russian city. It's historically Russian. Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and possibly Sumy even. These may fall under Russian control because they're historically Russian, Russian-speaking areas. Now, another item here is that Finland and Latvia are giving the okay to place nuclear weapons within their borders. This is a replay in reverse of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So in 1962, those of you who are not aware of it, the United States had placed missiles in Turkey and was also directly threatening the Cuban Revolution. So Fidel Castro, who was the president at the time, asked the Russians, the Soviets, to bring in missiles and place them on Cuban soil. And when President Kennedy found out about that, he said, you either take those missiles out or we're going to attack Cuba and take them out ourselves. It turns out that during that whole altercation, the United States was in fact attacking Russian assets, Soviet assets, and there was a Soviet submarine that was under attack by a U.S. ship. It lost contact with the headquarters in Moscow, and it was assumed that the ship was under attack and that there was an actual war going on. And it was only the veto of the political officer on that submarine. There were 3 people who had to come to an agreement to fire back. And the political officer said, let's not do that. And it turns out, in fact, that the American ship that was dropping these depth charges essentially was acting out of line. But because the Soviet Union didn't respond, we didn't have a nuclear war. But the point is that Cuba was the focus of a possible nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And that's because the missiles were so close to the U.S. Mainland that the United States felt compelled to threaten Cuba. Now we're talking about Finland and Latvia, who were literally on the border of the Russian Federation, talking about placing nuclear weapons within their countries. And that doesn't even count the fact that Germany and Turkey and Netherlands and Italy, several other countries, have nuclear weapons on their soil. And this raises the whole question of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. There's some indication that just placing these missiles on soil that's so close to Russia, with countries that are not nuclear powers, is tantamount to a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The U.S. is using their territory to place nuclear weapons very, very close to Russia, which puts Russia in a hair-trigger, precarious situation. So, if you can just imagine, something happens and Russia sees some blip on the screen showing that a possible missile has been launched towards Moscow or St. Petersburg or wherever, and they say, okay, that's it. We're gonna fire everything we've got. That's how close we are to nuclear Armageddon because of the incredibly reckless policy that the United States has. And now with this putting missiles in Finland and in Latvia, it's just really getting worse and worse and worse. Now, there's another issue here. The European economy had depended on cheap Russian energy. Yet, one of the ways that this whole crisis began was because Poland has this visceral Russophobia. And I know a couple of Poles, and they absolutely hate Russia. I just Eric, I can't understand why you don't hate Russia. So a little bit of background here. In 1934, Poland signed a non-aggression pact with Germany, and as time went on, this is 1934, and 1938, 1939, and the Soviet Union is saying, we think you're in danger here, and maybe you should allow us to, place some Soviet troops on your borders, or at least give us the opportunity to go into the country to counteract this threat. Poland, they'd have nothing of it, and of course, the 5 years after Poland signed this non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, they got attacked and they lost. I think Poland lost 6 million people. They suffered terribly because of this, and yet they have this obsession with Russia. Now, of course, the Poles are saying to the Ukrainians, "Hey, you guys, we kind of remember what you did to us in World War II when Bandera and his crowd, killed 100,000 Poles, and now you're honoring these people, and we don't feel so good about that. But Russia is really bad, so that we don't know what to do about this problem. Please don't honor those people who slaughtered 100,000 Poles, but it's the Russians that are the real problem." This is how they think. It's just kind of, you have to really wonder what's going on. But in any case, what happened at a certain point, that Poland had a long-term contract with, I think it was Gazprom, or one of the major, gas providers in Russia. It had been very stable prices, and because these were long-term contracts. So the Polish government said, "Hey, we're paying too much for this gas here. So we know that it's like, when you have long-term interest rates, they're more stable, but short-term interest rates are not stable, but they're usually lower. However, if economic conditions change, then the cost of money, that is the interest, can go above the interest rate of a long-term loan." This is exactly what happened with the energy prices in Europe, where this instability that has been going on resulted in Poland suing Russia to abrogate the long-term stable contracts, give them a short-term contract, and then the short-term prices went above the long-term prices. So they basically shot themselves in the foot, and they blame Russia for this. The same thing happened with Germany. Germany had a long-term contract with Russia, and they just get infected with this Russophobia, and they say, we're going to punish Russia by cutting off access to Russian supplies. We're going to look the other way while the Nord Stream pipeline is destroyed, which both Victoria Nuland and Joseph Biden promised would happen. And but when they do an investigation, we don't know who. Oh, it might have been Ukraine who did it. Heaven forbid they consider the possibility that their ally, the United States, was directly responsible for it. So this just shows you the kind of derangement that is endemic in the European countries. And of course, Europe and Germany is being essentially deindustrialized because the expensive U.S. gas, this is freedom gas. They're free of that dirty, cheap Russian stuff, which fueled their economy so stably for decades. But they think they're better off paying 2 or 3 times or more for U.S. gas. What are they thinking? But in any case, these European countries are all predicting war with Russia in the coming years, and they're talking about by 2030 they're going to be at war with Russia. So here you are, you've been invaded by the Europeans, in 1812 with Napoleon, and in 1853 to 55 with the Crimean War, and with World War I, Germany invaded Russia. And after the Russian Revolution, the European and U.S. and Japan also invaded the Soviet Union to ally themselves with the White Russians, who opposed the new Soviet government. And so, and then you have people like Henry Ford and Tom Watson of IBM, being friendly with Hitler. and they were what was called trading with the enemy. So you had this faction within the United States actually on the side of Nazi Germany during World War II. And of course, they didn't have their way at that time, although the Nazis were using Ford trucks. That is, the Ford Motor Company was actually supplying Germany with Ford trucks, and Standard Oil, which was the major oil company out of which Mobil Oil and Exxon came, was the oil monopoly. They were supplying oil to the Nazis as well. So you have this whole history of either covert or overt hostility towards Russia, and Russia's watching all this going on, and they're saying, I think we have a problem here. But of course, most of the people in the West know nothing about this, and they assume that Russia's the aggressor. Now, I'll mention particularly in England, they've attacked Russia in the Crimean War in 1853 to 55 or 56. And as I mentioned, the Russian Revolution, the Civil War of Russia. And after World War II, after Russia had, the Soviet Union had defeated the Wehrmacht, the German invaders, and for which Winston Churchill profusely thanked the Soviet Union for doing that. After the war is over, Churchill says, "Well, we got rid of that German threat. Now let's get back to business and let's invade the Soviet Union." So he created this plan called Operation Unthinkable, which fortunately they didn't do, or you could say unfortunately, because if they had undertaken Operation Unthinkable, then the Soviet Union probably would have rolled through Western Europe, and we wouldn't have any of this problem. And the complexion of Europe and the whole West would be entirely different. But Churchill showed some restraint. His military advisor says, don't do that. Stalin himself said, we can see what you're planning, and don't even think about it. So they avoided that. But nevertheless, England has been constantly plotting and attacking Russia for decades, and especially through Ukraine. They recently, they basically created and designed the called Flamingo long-range missiles that are threatening Russia, and also they're landing in Russia, causing damage. And this is a British project, and British said, we have nothing to do with this. This is all Ukraine, so now they're talking about that is, the Russians are talking about, and Margaret Simeon, which I mentioned earlier, she's saying, if you guys continually, are obsessed with attacking us, then, don't be surprised if Russian missiles start attacking the industrial infrastructure that is allowing the attacks on our country, the Russian Federation. So this whole situation could rapidly spin way out of control and could even go nuclear, especially with somebody like Trump, who is apparently, psychologically and, mentally, it's really questionable what his state of mind is. Now, on a personal note, I visited Crimea back in 2015. And again, I think it was in 2023. And there's a city called Sevastopol, which I had some fondness for, because in Sonoma County, there's a city called Sebastopol, which was named after Sevastopol because there was actually a Russian presence on the Sonoma County coast of Northern California. There's a Russian river there. It's called the Russian River, and a city called Sebastopol. In any case, I visited Sevastopol, and there's a museum that talks about the Crimean War. And it turns out that, just reading this here, the Sevastopol Museum, which I visited in a previous visit, was attacked using direct help of the British, who resent their loss in the Crimean War. According to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the high-profile attack by the armed forces of Ukraine on the Sevastopol Defense Museum in June this year was meticulously planned by British special services. The agency emphasizes that the Ukrainian military prepared and launched drones, but were unaware of the true purpose. The flight tasks were loaded into the weapons system by British, quote-unquote, advisors operating undercover. For London, the museum is a historical trigger, a reminder of the Crimean War and the colossal losses of the British elite. The burning of the panorama, that's this museum, which it's basically, it's a round museum with these huge paintings of battle scenes of that war. Very impressive. In any case, it's a reminder of the Crimean War and the colossal losses of the British elite. I mentioned in an earlier video the charge of the Light Brigade, where these crazy and what can I say, self-satisfied British elite officers sent a British cavalry up to fight against Russian cannon. They got shot to pieces, and then they resent Russia for fighting back. So the burning of the panorama, according to the intelligence service, was an act of destroying the evidence of the heroism of the Russian soldier for Albion, that is, for England. So this is the kind of thing that is going on now, and it looks to me that the West is becoming increasingly desperate and unbalanced, mentally unbalanced, and so they're doing these provocations that are extremely dangerous. And having nuclear weapons, there's talk of nuclear weapons being right on Russia's borders, and who knows where this is all going. So I thought that I should just bring all these. This is like 13 items that I thought I should bring to your attention, and this doesn't even count the problem that is going on between the United States and Iran. So you've got these two major wars that are happening, both of which have the capacity to spin completely out of control. And what are we going to do about it? I don't really have an answer. I was thinking maybe I should just write my congressperson and say, would you please enact a 25th Amendment and send President Trump to the funny farm or something, or put him in a comfortable room that's padded, because he's out of control here. So that's basically what I have to say in this video. And please share the video with your friends and colleagues and so on, because I think a lot of people are not made aware of these issues. The mainstream media does not want you to know about these things, although they're readily available. What I do is completely open source. I have no connections to any secret sources of any sort. So somebody recently asked me whether the mainstream media is really not credible, and I have to point out that if you do a little bit of digging, you find out that it really is not credible. It is a direct negative influence on the public discourse. So that's basically what I have to say on this video. Please like and share. Please make a donation if you would. And thanks again for listening. I'll talk with you again soon.